to engage in an answer, and she just keeps talking and talking. It's because she doesn't have an answer for it. I notice this. All the posture, like, oh, you're so upset. Like, oh, I'm getting there, blah, blah, blah. UBI would be great, blah, blah. Like, all this talking is because she doesn't have an answer for the question.
Is a great thing. But let's be real. First of all, there are going to be strings attached to that, whether it's, citizenship.
That's not the hypothetical, though.
But, okay, what's the hypothetical? Give me
the hypothetical is everyone gets $3,000 a month for nothing input into the system.
Okay.
That ultimately that's what they get. They can do with it as they please.
Okay, sick.
I
so
feel like
$3,000 a month
intellectually.
is meaningless to me because I have no idea what the cost of everything is. I have no idea what that actually buys for you, or if
Obviously,
it even
talking within an American context where
Okay.
$3,000 a month is a living wage.
Sure. Yeah, it depends on where you live. But sure. Yeah. That's great. That's a step in the right direction. I think that's fantastic. If everybody gets a living wage, that gives people a whole lot more ability to just not participate. And that also puts pressure on companies to offer things more than just coconuts for dicks. But I don't think it solves all the problems that we're talking about. I just think it's a step in the right direction. I think that a UBI has other issues that are structural. Like, for example, I imagine that, like, obviously, if we want to go into a complete hypothetical where every person in the world just received $3,000, I don't know what that even means anymore. But if we're talking about...
Wait, what?
I think that a UBI has other issues that are structural. Like, for example, I imagine that, like, obviously, if we want to go...
Would you say we've accomplished
direction? I think that a UBI has other issues that are structural. Like, for example, I imagine that, like, obviously, if we want to go into a complete hypothetical where every person in the world just received $3,000, I don't know what that even means anymore. But if we're talking about a government that provides for people's needs and allows them to seek out their desires, that's great. That's super fantastic. And I'm not entirely opposed to that system. I just, I guess this is kind of like what you're talking about is kind of like a centralized, Soviet-style communist vision, where there's like a government that takes over and mandates $3,000 a month, and then you have an economy you can participate in, kind of like mostly willingly, though there's still some aspects of it. I think it's a huge step in the right direction. Now, if it actually happens, I don't know. A lot of people seem really opposed to UBIs. UBIs seem to be really difficult to win over. And often seem right, but like that's the thing though. I mean, I can imagine all kinds of things. Like, I could also imagine a world in which aliens fly around the Earth and they deliver food directly to humans. And I think that would be completely different. You think it's just. You think it's right.
Jesus Christ. Thanks for the tier 4 sub. Was that Hiffer? Hafer? How do you read your name? Hiffer. Fuck, I'm doing this real quick, sorry. I understand the cherry debate has started. Holy shit, I understand it. I'm probably just gonna end up watching the VOD. Jesus.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going, Destiny? How's your day?
Great. Well, from a utilitarian
Well, hey,
perspective, we should ban coconut. Hold on one second, one second.
Wanted to...
Jesus, I mean, these people spamming my shit. Fucking shit. Have you had 2 debates so far with Demon Mama, or just 1?
I have had only 1 debate so far.
Have you ran into the moralizing thing yet? Or do you understand what I mean when I say that?
I do to a certain extent. I mean, I think that with Demon Mama, it wasn't necessarily the moralizing that caused an issue in the debate. I think that the struggle that I would say that she had, but more that I had because of I just didn't expect this to. So normally when I talk to a socialist, they're pretty willing to define their system, and engage in that conversation. And to be fair, though, it seems Demon Mama leans more on the anarchist side rather than just saying she's a socialist. And in my experience, anarchists are quite hesitant to actually define
because it's entirely fantastical and it's hard. And as soon as you start to define anything with concreteness, usually there's like a million different potential problems you can pick out. It's like arguing with like libertarians, kind of like. As soon as somebody starts saying something like, there should be no government. Well, how do you enforce contracts? Well, there should be a central body of government. Okay, well, that's a government, right? You end up like getting dumb loops like this.
It's government with extra steps. I mean, I talked to my friend and I said that, intellectually, we are all anarchists. Like the idea of a society where you don't have to work or face any sort of coercion of any type. I mean, that sounds great to anyone. right? But as long as there are people who have the instinct towards violence or the instinct towards working outside of social norms and sort of accepted custom, which has been thus far all of human history, and it will be tomorrow, anarchy just doesn't practically make any sense. It seems like we need to have an agreed upon entity that has a monopoly of violence, that's allowed to sort of enact violence upon people, either internal or external, in the form of police or military, and that, as long as it's within a democratic framework, seems to be the best way to organize society. I did think, I think the part of the debate where I think the worst point, it seemed like, so I don't, have you watched the debate? Is that
just
why,
people just send me little clips. I just watched your 3 minutes of like trying to get her to understand a hypothetical. Like, what if we gave a $3,000 UBI?
Oh, there was a part in the debate where it seemed like she was making class reductionist type arguments. So it seemed like what she was saying is, like, oh, capitalism is one of the main reasons that
for everything. It's where racism comes from. It's where misogyny comes from. It's where patriarchy comes from. I listened to another thing where somebody was trying to make the claim that, oh, fuck, I don't remember if this is Demon Mom or Vosh, but somebody was literally saying, like, oh, yeah, like, this started because of capitalism, some sort of it might even been the family unit. Like, the only reason why we have moms and dads or whatever is because of, like, fucking, like, capitalism, like, wants to sell things for Mother's Day and Father's Day, like, crazy shit like that, yeah.
The biblical family structure was because of capitalism, I guess. That's an interesting statement. But no, it seemed like, because so I talked about, you know, I think, oh, a social democratic style society with regulated capitalism, welfare state, it's the best society. And she said something like, well, you know, there are many social democratic societies. Take the UK. They recently just passed anti-trans discrimination laws where you can't get trans-affirming care unless you're, I think, over the age of 16. And I was like, well, that doesn't really have anything to do with, like, I'm really making economic statements here. I'm not, obviously there have been more and less capitalist societies with more and less bigotry in them, and I'm not really sure it makes any sense to retort my mode of economic production by saying that the UK is passing anti-trans laws. And what her point was that, well, it seemed that the capitalist system enables sort of a necessary exploitation of marginalized groups. But I think the issue is that under a communal framework like she advocated for, there's nothing stopping those same bigotries in the first place, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
this is
excluded from the commune. Right?
I push this on a lot, and most of them don't. Well, I don't talk to any people because they won't talk to me because they get frustrated.
Damn.
People seem to say things like, oh, like, these conversations are so frustrating. A really big one we talked about was climate change. If everything was just cooperatively owned, we wouldn't be polluting as much. And, well, the reason why we have problems with climate change, in my opinion, are because it's an immediate punishment for a long-term reward, right? You have to cut emissions or pay more for energy now for a long-term potential gain.
Yeah, it's like losing weight or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
and two, oftentimes the negative aspects of pollution are highly unlocal, whatever the opposite of local means. They're not localized. So, for instance, if I pollute with my car, the gas doesn't go right into my house. It's like spread out, right? And these like two things combine to create they're really bad for how humans view things because it fucks with us and our ability to like solve that problem. And when people start saying like, oh, well, if it was all just co-ops, it would be fixed. Like, well, who's to say that the people running the fossil fuel plant wouldn't vote to keep their jobs, right? Like, why? Like, and I always push on answers like that. Well, who's to say that? Why would they vote to get rid of their own jobs? Or why would they do this or that? And then they always go back to they leave communism or socialism, and then they jump back over to social democracy. We're like, well, hold on, that's okay because we would take care of these people with like a big welfare state. And I was like, okay, but now we're now we're going more liberal than socialist or communist, right? Something that I think you should push on when you talk to these people. I do this a lot, okay? But you should demand like them to admit, listen, whatever society you envision, people are going to be forced to work jobs that they don't want to work. I think that's a really big one that you need to make people admit.
No, Demon Mom and I, we had that discussion because when we got into the Coconut Island dick sucking analogy, she's like, well, look, no matter how great social democracy is, you still got to suck dick for coconuts. And it's like, no, but you don't have to suck dick for coconuts. There's one guy on the street saying he wants you to suck his dick for coconuts, and then there's like 17,000 other employers who are offering you, good pay, union protection, worker board membership. You've got a good welfare state to fall back on. Like, I just don't think this is the same as like sucking someone's dick for coconuts, right? It's not a fair analogy in those cases. Now,
even if you don't do that, if I land on a island, and it's not one person telling me I have to suck dick for coconuts, it's a whole commune telling me I have to suck dick for coconuts. It's the same fucking shit. What the fuck? What's the difference? Right? Like the buy-in to a commune, like they still have to accept you. There's still gonna be some work or dick sucking that's gonna have to happen in exchange for you joining. Like these types of exploitative relationships are almost like, I don't think there is a such thing. This might be more philosophical than anything, but I don't think there's any such thing as a one-to-one completely equal power relationship and anywhere in humankind. Somebody's always got something that somebody else wants, and somebody else always wants to trade something for somebody. Like, necessarily, if that wasn't the case, then no voluntary trade would ever take place ever in the history of all of mankind.
Yeah, the idea isn't that it's necessarily equal, because people have different sort of, we call them maybe an indifference curve, but people have different preferences, right? And so the idea would just be that, you're trading some amount of X for some amount of Y, and because you value the Y more than the X, and the other person values the X more than the Y, you end up with sort of a net benefit here. Yeah. Right. And with working at a company, what you're trading is some amount of ease of cash flow, right? Because it's probably easier to get a paycheck than it is to start your own business from scratch and do all that stuff. With the lower pay, right? It's a lower reward probably, right? So the guy who owns like McDonald's is making more than the guy that works at McDonald's, right? So, and there's some coercive element to that for sure, but that's why like in a social democratic or like just a regulated sort of capitalist framework, you try to mitigate that and put as much power in the hands of workers as you can while still allowing private capital. I mean, you mentioned it sounds more like capitalism. I'm going to release a video on Saturday. I did a long video about worker co-ops, and the next one I'm releasing is on Saturday. It's 3 times as long. And one thing I go into is that it seems like some market socialists, now Demon Mama doesn't really claim market socialism, to be fair. She said that even, you're still sucking the dicks for coconuts, even if it's a worker cooperative, right? So it's like, okay, well, that's one thing. But it seems like a lot of market socialists have definitions of market socialism that really, I mean, call it what you want, that just seems like capitalism to me. Like if you've got like I remember watching a Richard Wolff debate, and it seemed like what Richard Wolff's definition of like his version of socialism would be was, I want mostly co-ops and less private investment.
Yeah, that's what it felt like, which is like, that's liberalism, bro.
If you have if you've got voluntary private investment, that's just capitalism at that point, right? I mean, you're giving people the option to work at either co-ops or privately held companies. You're giving people the option of either starting their own business or starting a co-op. That's basically what we have now. It's just that there's a lot. It happens to be more private companies than cooperatives, and so it can be a little, confusing when arguing with some socialists, because like if you're like a Bernie Sanders socialist, where really he doesn't really seem to advocate for like the workers owning the means of production, in a whole sense. It seems like the word is pointless at that point, right?
It's irritating to me when socialists will have 15 different ways to define socialism, but then when they go and they attack capitalism, it seems like they just attack all of capitalism, which doesn't make sense, because like when I get into like, well, what is your envisionment of like socialism, and then it's like somebody like Wolff will give me a definition that is capitalism, right? If you have an economic system set up with markets where the price is not dictated by a central body, but is figured out like on exchange, right? Like buying and selling is how price are determined. Markets. And then when there is some amount of private investment allowed, wow, this is absolutely capitalism. It's not even like kind of socialism, or that's just 100% capitalism. Like this, it's really irritating that like you're advocating for this. Meanwhile, you will relentlessly shit on capitalism as a quote unquote socialist, where your umbrella is so wide it includes, all the way from anarchists to social democrats to just liberals, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's irritating.
Yeah, I mean, if you're ultimately, I think that like it depends on what kind of market socialist you are. Now, Demon Mama seemed to be more of an anarchist, where her big problem was basically just like the commodity form, you know, selling things for profit, and having to work are like, it seemed like those were the two big criticisms that, you know, Demon Mama had for the current system. And the issue is that, you know, again, even if you theoretically could get rid of the commodity form, you're always going to have to work to some extent.
Yeah,
right?
they have this
you're gonna
greatest.
have to, you know.
They have this assumption of like unlimited scarcity, that like, oh well, maybe people won't have to work, or maybe everybody could be like a basket weaver or a poet in the commune, and we still get all the goods and services we need.
Yeah, or rather that all of society's needs will just happen to be filled by people who voluntarily want to do them, right? That, you know, that you're not selling anything for profit, so you're not necessarily getting any sort of, you know, surplus or risk-adjusted return or anything, but also that these societal needs will just be filled, right? And it's like, well, to a certain extent, this is where labor markets really come in handy, because, you know, if nobody wants to do a certain thing and there's not enough people to do it, and people need that thing to be done, well, they're going to get paid more.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can sort of naturally fill these gaps.
I've had arguments.
Commune, like,
yeah, I've had arguments with these lefty people. Michael Albert, the guy that did participatory economics, was one of them. I've had these arguments where I'm like, okay, what do you do if there's a really shit job, like working at a nuclear power plant, nobody wants to do it, but somebody needs to do it? And the things that people start to say. So I think Michael Albert started walking me down. It's like, okay, well, if there were certain jobs where the work wasn't that much fun, but we really need people to do them, they would probably be allocated more worker credits for that type of work. And it's like in a really roundabout way, you're building like the most inefficient market ever. Like at some point, like, why doesn't a market handle this? Like, why are you trying to rebuild this and you know, essentially plan this out? Like,
no, Michael Albert's thing was, it might be similar to that, but I remember that debate because it was one of the first times that you debated like someone who would be considered like an academic, you know, more of
a book on
Richard Wolff kind of guy. Yeah, and his system because essentially what his system seemed to be was that you guys talked about a hospital, and what his system seemed to be was that everyone would mostly do a few things, and generally everyone would to some extent do a lot of things. So he talked about how in Argentina, how they had he described it like it was a whole economic transformation, but from looking into it, there wasn't a lot of factories that did this. But basically, there were a few factories that were taken over by workers, basically by force. And the workers, to my knowledge, are still running those factories. So it's worker-owned and operated businesses at this point. And I guess in Argentina, the police don't, like, if that happened in America, the police would literally just arrest like every single one of the people in the factory. But that didn't happen in Argentina. And he said that worker satisfaction didn't really improve to the extent that he would have expected, because it's now worker managed. And he said that the reason was because there's still managers and employees. It's just that there's no capital interest anymore. And so his distinction from like a Richard Wolff type is that the hierarchy of the individual workplace has to be collapsed. So if you had a hospital, his example was, you know, someone who's a custodial worker might learn how to do surgery, and the surgeon might also be tasked with cleaning the hospital to a certain extent, right? And that just seemed like he was, because that
it's like the difference he drew was there was like he was talking about there was empowering labor, I think is what he called it, but like labor where you had more control or direction over the job you did versus either disempowered labor or labor. You might have another word to use for it, but yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like what he was talking about was basically like high-skilled, high-paid labor versus lower-skilled and lower-paid labor. He didn't call it that, but that seemed to be.
Or I think it was empowered work and onerous work might have been the two words he used, but yeah.
Maybe, and so that was his system. Just seemed like, because basically you get no gains from like nobody's specialized anymore for the most part, it sounded like, right? And so you seem to, because everybody's working every job, all the hours are kind of shuffled, and then you do a drawing for how many hours each person is going to work for in a particular job in your company per week. Yeah and I think that to a certain extent, it's true that nobody wants to be a custodial worker, but also to a certain extent, it depends, right? So a lot of people might think of, say, garbage man as like a really shit job for people to have, but in a lot of places, garbage man it's a unionized job, and you get health benefits, and it seemed like, at least in my experience with, I grew up in a family of low-skilled but unionized people, and in my experience, they liked their jobs, right? Even though they were, quote, like, not, satisfactory or whatever the Michael Abbott term was that they liked their jobs because they had a union and representation, and it was a good opportunity. Like, everyone might sort of in their head imagine that they might rather be Jeff Bezos, but not everyone has sort of the skill and connection to do that kind of thing. You just try to collapse those macro hierarchies. Like, Michael Abbott's thing with the firm level hierarchy is a problem. Seems like, you're just basically just destroying the idea of specialized labor and
any of the gains
getting
that
people
go along with it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And back to the Demon Mama discussion, it was that seemed to be one of the issues, was that this model definition, she wanted to not really necessarily define it for a bulk of the conversation. And one of the interesting points in the conversation was she talked about the trans thing, trans people in
the UK
are being discriminated against.
Yeah.
And my point was that, well, I mean, take gay people, for instance. Gay people have been discriminated against by society for like almost all of human history. It's only until very recently that in some countries, gay people have been sort of advantaged. And she said that her response to that was, I was like, I don't think that gay people in medieval Europe
I did watch this, and I watched this part. I don't know if you caught this, but you pushed back a little bit, and you were like, I don't think it, because she was like, oh no, gay people, I think we're doing okay in the medieval part. Or at some point, you guys were talking about medieval, and she said something where she was like, I'm not really an expert on medieval stuff. I don't know much about it. And then, like, I think it was 2 sentences later, she was like, I've read books on the medieval time period. I know a lot about it for LGBT stuff. It was literally like she reversed position in 2 sentences on it. But yeah, okay, yeah. It was. Somebody in chat told me I was remembering a Vosh combo, but it was a Demon Mama combo. I remember now. Because she was trying to make the argument too that gay people and all that were actually treated really well, and then she cringeworthily brought up the fucking Greeks or whatever, where like guys would rape little kids or whatever. Yeah. And she's like, oh yes, it was really great gay relationships. Gay relationships have been demonized for a long time in the world. It wasn't just capitalism that made gayness unpopular. It was so stupid. Yeah. Oh Jesus.
Well, even in, I mean, like, to a certain extent, it might be comforting, the idea of, oh, actually, gay people were totally accepted in ancient Greece. But the reality is, gay people were also treated like shit in ancient Greece, right? That's kind of a mislabeling and interpretation of that history. So gay people, for the bulk of human, history, have been treated quite badly. And that was the conversation. I was like, well, I don't think, people in medieval times didn't operate under capitalism, but I would say gay people were treated a fair bit worse in medieval times than they are today. And her reaction to that was sort of a, oh, I don't know, and it's
and it's like, come on, dude, you're gonna fight when I get people in conversations to start to fight me on like the most ridiculous points. I'm like, okay, like you're so scared about giving any ground to anything. Like I can tell you're not really approaching this in the best faith conversation, And you get people that will start to fight you on every little thing when you're trying to build an argument. It's like, come on, really? Like,
No, to a certain extent, I think it was. It was a fine conversation. I think that it wasn't, super. People, when I proposed the debate, everyone was saying that, oh, Mama's going to be super loud and aggressive and horrible, and it might not, it's not even going to be productive. But I would say it was a productive, reasonable conversation. But there were points where it was frustrating to the extent that she wouldn't, for about an hour or so, she wouldn't define what her system was, and there were points here and there, like the whole, like, maybe the treatment of gay people in medieval times versus today, maybe that's a toss. That seems kind of some unreasonable portions of the debate. But maybe I sounded unreasonable when I said social democracy is pretty sweet. So maybe there's the same. But But no, yeah, you should, unselfishly, you should watch the debate, and hopefully you can make it through it. A bunch of people commented that they weren't able to make it all the way through because they really don't like Demon Mama. But I thought it was a fine conversation, and interestingly, it got I don't know why this is, but I actually got more views on the Demon Mama conversation than I did with Bosch, which is surprising because Bosch is like a much larger creator than Demon Mama, but I guess people just, I don't know, really wanted to see Demon Mama talk economics or something.
If you're trying to get big on YouTube or Twitch, or this is like content creation is what you want, there is a plugin that I ultra super recommend.
Okay.
Debating
well, what does it do?
Debating Demon Mama. I think it's called Reddit Check.
All right.
Okay.
Hello.
One thing that's really nice, do you have my stream open? Just curious.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you can see this, but like, so I'm opening up your debating Vosh video. I see that got 10,000, and then the debating Demon Mama. It won't always check 100% like this because there's like a YouTube algorithm too. But I can check under Reddit, like, was this posted somewhere? And then you can see like what subreddits your debate is posted to, and then that can kind of give you an indication of where some views might be coming from as well.
Yeah, cool. I know that on analytics, on the analytics side of YouTube, it'll tell you. I think all it tells you is the proportion of your views that are from external sources, and that, like, I mean, I guess that's kind of useful, but it'd be better to know more.
Yeah, it's just nice to see if stuff gets posted to Reddit. For the you have way more Reddit threads about your Vosh debate though. You must have gotten more algorithmic traction on the Demon Mama one. So good job.
Oh yeah, I post. I currently post my stuff to basically communities that allow it. I think that's actually what got me banned from your. Like, I didn't get a reason for why I got banned from your Reddit, but
oh, it was. I saw the ban reason. It was spam. But yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I post my once every other week video, I guess, was too much. But to be fair, some like some subreddits have rules like that, and so I did that with like the neoliberal subreddit a couple times, and one of the mods was like, we actually like your videos, but we have a rule against this. Like, oh, okay, I mean that's totally fine. So I don't post to any Reddits that have rules. And like with your subreddit, I assumed that's what it was, so I didn't post any videos like that ever since then. But yes, to the chat, Destiny did unban me, so I'm a free man once again in the Destiny subreddit. But yeah, but YouTube's been great so far. I think since talking to Vosh and you and Demon Mama, I think I've gone from maybe 2,000 subs to 4,600. So it's been pretty sweet. Good ride so far.
Nice. I look forward to, I think it's about 6 months until we're mortal enemies, and you're talking about me being a rapist or some shit, so it should be fun. I look forward to the fighting in the future. So, wait, what is your personal like economic view? I guess are you like a social democrat or a socialist or?
No. So I'm a capitalist, social democrat type, capitalist. So, to me, the best system in the world is probably, to some marginal extent, it's one of the Nordic countries. If I had to absolutely pick one, it would probably be Norway. Would be the best economic model, and that was it. When I thought about our talk, you asked me if we disagreed on anything. I remembered a thing we disagreed on.
Okay.
Stock buybacks. I think that is actually something we have a disagreement over.
Okay, but, you got to hit me with some esoteric part of the tax code to get me off of this position. So,
well, my thought is that it doesn't have to be too long, but my thought is that I think stock buybacks are useful for recapitalization. So if a company wants to basically take out debt and buy back stock to recapitalize itself and become more debt, leverage heavy for tax purposes, I think that's fine. The original purpose of stock buybacks was the idea that a company felt like it's undervalued, and so they could buy back their stock in order to essentially raise the value of its stock to the point that they're happy with their valuation.
Because if you feel like the true value of your company is greater than the stock value of the company, then buying shares of your company is essentially just investing in yourself, which should be positive, assuming you have other projects to invest in, right?
Exactly, and that seems like a reasonable enough reason to keep stock buybacks around. It's just that it seems like in modern history, the way that stock buybacks are used is not as a way for corporations to speculate on their own stock, but rather is just a way to return capital to shareholders. And I don't think that, like, stock buybacks to me it's not the way that you'd want companies to return capital to shareholders. If you want companies to return capital to shareholders, they should either do dividends or they should do variable dividends. To me, stock buybacks is the worst way that a company could return capital to shareholders, because really, I don't really think I'm comfortable with companies speculating on their own stock. Doesn't seem like the best, incentive structure to keep in mind. And
I guess like the question is that like, so like the only legitimate argument that I think there can be related to stock buybacks and dividends is the tax preference of it. So like maybe we're saying if a company is worth more and they want to return value in the way of dividends, you pay taxes on that immediately rather than appreciating the stock, which you can kind of pick and choose where to realize those gains, so you get a little bit more control, meaning less taxable, less taxes incurred by the government.
And people that sell their stock, they pay the capital gains tax as well, and that's an option they have.
I guess the question is that at the end of the day, though, in terms of like, I don't agree with the framing of like speculating on their own company, right? Because if you have $50,000 of capital or cash, I guess we're gonna say, right? If you either pay it out in a dividend or you buy back the stock, I mean, you're speculating either way. It's the same thing, right? Like the end result to both of those equations is identical, in that you're just dumping money into your company, and it's going back to the people that are capitalizing your company, right?
Well, I think the difference, though, is that it doesn't reorient the balance of power of the company to a certain extent, right? That the company now doesn't own its own stock if they do a dividend, and so they're not diluting the power of certain shareholders, or perhaps magnifying them, just depending on the shares that they end up buying. And then the second part would be that you can always declare a variable dividend, or a one-time dividend, I should say, special dividend, right? You can do one-time dividends, right? And if the argument is, well, the taxes are kind of fucky, so that's why stock buybacks might make sense. Well, again, that's more of an argument for why the tax code should be changed, not for stock buybacks. I think that the burden of people who are in favor of stock buybacks is to say, why should a company be allowed to speculate on their own stock? Because they can always return capital in form of one-time or regular dividends. So why is speculation value to keep in the market?
Well, when you buy back shares, I guess there's two. First, a question: when you buy back those shares as a company, don't you normally retire the shares afterwards, or no?
You can and you can't. It just depends. So some companies might buy back their shares literally to speculate. So they might buy back their shares and then sell them later for a capital gain. But sometimes you're right; they do retire them for the purposes of recapitalizing themselves, or they might they might retire them just to return, raise the value of their stock and stuff like that.
And then, so the second thing is, my understanding is that if you have $50,000, I could either go to the market and buy back my own shares and then retire those shares. I think it's usually because you want to raise value for your shareholders, the people that own stock in your company, or I can pay $50,000 out to everybody that owns shares. Mathematically, I think those two processes are supposed to be identical in terms of 50 grand is going into this thing that's returning value to the shareholders. It seems like either way you do it, you're in a way speculating on, like, you have $50,000 to spend. If you don't have any good like NPV plus projects to put that money into, then you can either sit on the cash and do nothing, or you can just return it to shareholders. Like either way, it's kind of a gamble, right? Like everything you do with your cash is a gamble. You're either looking for profitable projects, or you're looking to return to shareholders so that your stock is more attractive for future investors, right?
Sure, kind of, yeah. I think that there is a difference between offloading some of your cash flow to dividends, either like regular dividends or special dividends, and actually buying back the stock and restricting the market of your stock, right?
Why? What's the difference? Why? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, because again, when you issue a dividend, you're not changing the shareholder structure of a company, right? You're not diluting the market at all in terms. Well, I say diluting, but you're not like you're not constricting the amount of stock of your company in the market.
What is that for a reasonably large company? Assuming we're not going to have because you're not going to be like all of a sudden the company is like taken away majority ownership from somebody or some group of people, right? Like, is this change in structure really meaningful for like a company listed on like the NASDAQ or the S&P 500 or whatever? Or
honestly, the answer to that is I'm not sure. Right? I'm not sure if a company's ever bought back like 30% of its stock or anything like that, where you might actually see like crazy changes.
I feel like that would never happen because the board would have to approve that like major of an investment, right? There's no way that
you'd need the money to do it. Yeah, I mean to in some part that would be, if you think of like Apple or something, right? That's billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So it might depend on the company and the type of cash they see, but so that's true. But I think that my argument would be more that they shouldn't be allowed to restrict that at all. I think that when companies speculate in a hard sense on their stock, you're altering the value of the stock potentially in an unreasonable way. So what I mean by that is that it's true that when you have a dividend stock versus a no dividend stock, two companies are the exact same. A dividend stock is going to have a premium associated to it because it pays a dividend and the other one doesn't, right? But I think that when a company pays out a regular dividend, they end up with, how do I put it? They're paying out a dividend to attract investors, and by that way you could say they're speculating their stock. But I do think that when a company buys back their shares, they're actually speculating on the market itself, not on their own sort of internal company dynamics, right? When a company buys back their stock, they're going into the market.
I mean, I would argue that you're effectively doing the same thing either way. So maybe we can I either have a misunderstanding or maybe we'll argue about this. So I usually take issue, you haven't said this yet, you haven't said this phrase, you're kind of hinting at it, but not directly. I don't think you'd say something quite this dumb, but when somebody talks about like artificially inflating the value of a stock, right? It implies that there's some fundamental true value of a stock when stocks are just valued at whatever people want to buy and sell them for, right? So when you're kind of getting at this phrase of like, I don't know if buying back stocks is a good way of raising the value of a stock by, I'm going to say like artificially restricting the amount of like flow to the market or stock to the market or issued stock or whatever. I mean, we can say that, but arguably, when you're paying variable dividends, aren't you kind of trying to do the same thing? Aren't you trying to make your stock appear more attractive? Given all else equal, if I can buy stock between two companies and they have regular dividends at the same, but I see, well, this company issues, they have variable dividends and they're actually pretty favorable all the time. Aren't you kind of still making your stock more attractive in that way? Whether you do a buyback to restrict the amount of stock in the market, or whether you do variable dividends to make your stock more attractive to people looking for dividends when they buy stock?
No, you are. Yeah, to a certain extent, every company, every action they take, in theory, every action they take is to make their stock more attractive, right?
Yeah.
And so whether, like, for instance, like whether Vosh might say, donating to charity or doing PR events or, doing, having maybe appointing like a famous board of directors, like a lot of these big companies have just basically celebrities as their board, stuff like that, right? Every individual action, in theory, would just be to return sort of capital value or literal sort of cash to your shareholders, right? So in that way, yes. So both of these, like I said, are trying to make your stock more attractive, right? My issue really is just that, in my view, the best, the efficient market hypothesis, where the market might be containing all of the possible information
for buying, selling, and pricing, yeah.
Yeah, I think that when a company buys its own stock, they necessarily have information that the market doesn't have. So to a certain extent, they might be biasing the market in one way or another. And to another extent,
I understand what you're saying. Just real quick, because this is how I'm always going to push. So whenever you give an issue related to stock buybacks, I'm going to be pushing and I'm going to saying, isn't paying a dividend essentially doing the same thing? That's usually my question. So like, for instance, you just say that when a company engages in a stock buyback, they're influencing the value of their stock, but they're doing so with information that other actors in the market aren't necessarily privy to. But I mean, like, again, you could say the same thing with dividends, right? If you've decided that you're able to pay out a huge sum of money in dividends and not invest it in some other profitable venture, you're also sending signals to the market, right? Every company's action necessarily is going to be done, one, with information private to that company that's not publicly available, and then two, it's going to be sending signals to the market that other people can then act on afterwards. That's not going to be unique to buybacks, I would assume, right? It's going to be the same with a dividend payout anyway, no?
That's a good point. I've never heard the point like that before. I would say that that is pretty convincing. I think that my only response to that would be that, again, the uniqueness of a share buyback is that you're taking shares out of the market voluntarily, to be fair. People have to sell them to you to get them. You know, nobody's, you know, the company isn't forcibly buying back their stock or anything, but they're engaging in open market activities, buying back their shares, doing with it as they please, either holding it, canceling it, or you know, giving it to employees or something like that. I don't know. At that point, I think that alters the market potentially in a more significant way than just giving a special dividend does. Because when you give a special dividend, you're not actually changing the share structure of a company at all, you know, or anything like that. So I think that the usefulness of a share buyback might be twofold, to be fair. I thought of another reason. One is recapitalizing yourself, and the second one might be like, you know, maybe buying back your shares is like a transitive way to afford your dividend. Like if you've got 10 million shares, but you don't want to cut your dividend, maybe you could buy back shares, and then that like decreases your dividend obligation over time. That seems kind of weird, but I guess that's like theoretically another use for share buybacks. But no, that's the disagreement. I think is that corporations that buy back their stock.
Wait, I have a question about that.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if that's true. I'm going to ask because I don't know. My assumption would be is that dividends that are paid to a company are probably based off of your either total revenue or maybe even total profit. I doubt they're based on the number of outstanding shares. That'd be my guess. Like if I had a company with 100 shares that were publicly available, if I issued another 100 shares, I'm not doubling the obligations I have to pay on my dividends. The dividends are probably being cut in half. That'd be my guess. So if I had outstanding 200 shares and I bought back 100, I would still pay the same dividends next quarter. It would just be twice as much to each shareholder. That'd be my guess.
So my answer to this is that theoretically, you're right. That could happen. But typically, from my experience, like, you know, working at you know, the company that I worked at, for instance, one thing that you have to keep into account whenever you think about equity financing, where you issue shares to pay for something, you do take into account the increased obligation to pay dividends. Because typically, the way that the board of a company will announce a share is the board will be like, because technically regular and variable dividends are the same, because the board still technically approves like regular dividends every quarter.
Sure.
But what'll happen is the board will say, you know, we approve a dividend of 25 cents a share for Murphy shareholders payable this date, right? For shareholders this date. And if you issue like 1 million shares, well, companies are incredibly remiss to cut the actual amount of dividend that they pay.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're remiss to even keep it the same. A lot of times they'll increase it like a penny every year, every quarter or something. And so when you issue extra shares, it's typically under the assumption, especially for new shareholders, that you're going to get the same dividend that the other shareholders are going to get. Right. But you're right. I mean, maybe there could be examples of companies that like they issue 10% more shares and then they cut 10% of the dividend.
Now what you're talking about, that would be very sneaky if that was the case. If a company did like a stock buyback where they bought back 50% of their stock and then they cut their dividends in half, that would be a sneaky way for a company to hold on to more money. But my guess would be that a board of directors, well, actually, I feel like that would never happen because everybody is incentivized for that not to happen. So a CEO that is being compensated in stock wouldn't like that. And then the board, who all own huge portions of stock, also wouldn't like that unless they have some really ultra special way of returning capital to like higher value shareholders or something that would fuck over everybody else. But I think at that point, like fiduciary responsibility and shit, you would end up getting legally fucked. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying is I don't think the hypothetical of like, oh, well, because it seemed you asked the question, so I don't think a company would normally issue shares and then cut their dividend. Normally, it's just that if you if you plan on financing anything with equity and you pay a dividend, to be fair, at least I don't know if most companies don't pay a dividend, but like quite a large number of them don't.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more popular not to, especially in the tech world, because you just want to explosively grow your company and fuck dividends. You're just trying to get rich off of
yeah, selling the stock. Yeah. And that's, and to be fair, that's worked for most tech investors. I mean, you look, there was one. It was like if you bought an iPad in 2008 or something, whenever they came out, if you bought the iPad versus Apple stock, the iPad is worth basically nothing after whatever 13 years, but the Apple stock would be worth like almost 50 grand, something ridiculous. So, you know, it's worked for most people in the tech industry. But basically, when you issue equity, you know, you're probably going to be taking into account that your dividend's going to either remain the same or continue on some regular growth, and so then you're going to end up paying. You know, you get the financing from the equity. Sure, you get that cash flow, you get that money injection, I should say, but you're going to end up paying that amount in dividend over time. Similar to like if you refinance your bonds, you know, you might be, you know, pushing out your maturity, but you're still going to be paying the same interest. Or if you refinance at a higher rate, but it pushes out, it's more interest. So stuff like that. But well, I think you've actually given me a lot to think about in regard to stock buybacks. My thought was just that originally, to me, it sounds wonky, the idea of companies speculating their own stock. You brought up the point, well, they're kind of doing that when they issue special dividends anyway. I'm still kind of stuck on the point that, well, they're still altering the makeup of their shares, and I'm not sure a company should be able to do that with cash flow versus just issuing dividends. It seems like that would exert.
I would totally agree with that for smaller companies, depending on the number of shareholders. Like, say there's like 15 shareholders of a company. I mean, like, we could both imagine mathematically, right? Let's say there's a company, there's 100 shares, and I own 30 shares, and everybody else has like 5, 10, 20 or whatever. And then eventually I buy a few more shares, and then I have my company do like big stock buybacks, and then I retire those shares, and all of a sudden I'm a majority owner, right? That would be fucked up. I don't know if that'd be illegal or not, but that would literally be like, wait, what the fuck? Like, the company just took all their capital, did a big stock buyback, retired some shares, and now this guy that had 30% has a majority stake in the company. This is fucked up, right? I could totally see that for ownership structure changes, yeah. But I don't see that being a huge problem for like Fortune 500 or like S&P, like anything listed on a public exchange is gonna be way too big to do any tomfoolery like that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think one thing I haven't been able to find a good answer on, but maybe, you know, maybe someone like, you know, maybe Rage Pope would know the answer. He's more of a finance guy than I am, to be fair. Or I'm like a corporate finance guy. He seems to be more of a Wall Street kind of dude. Is that one thing that I would also be concerned about theoretically is that if a company could buy back its stock and then vote on its management decisions, like that seems like it could be really messed up, where a company could own, you know, 5% of their shares, and then they could exert that 5% of voting power on, you know, board decisions and management bonuses and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, there's no way.
Like
it has to be like retired or something, right? Like the stock has to get retired.
It's not necessarily,
because there's no way that like a company could have a majority ownership in itself, right? Like that would be so weird. What would that even mean?
I don't know. I mean, companies can have majority ownership of other companies. It's just a question of if they can have it to themselves. Now, I know that when a company buys a share back, it doesn't like, it's not necessarily a retired share. So that share is still active. The question would just be, and I haven't been able to find an answer for this, like when I've tried to research it before, is if a company's bought back shares that they might be holding on the balance sheet, are they able to vote?
Yeah, because how would that
decisions?
even? Yeah, that would just seems like it would be so weird. And if it was, that would like end up like recursively bouncing back to. Actually, wait. I'm pretty sure mathematically that would just work out to be exactly the same as it was anyway. Like, let's say for instance a company buys back 90% of its stock, and now the company owns 90% of its stock. Well, then the 10% of the people that still own the stock would just be choosing what that 90% would vote on anyway. They'd probably split it based on the number of votes. So it would be the same thing anyway. Does that make sense, what I just said?
No, it does. It does. But I think that the difference would be that the company could theoretically make, how do I put it? Like, if a company is accountable in minority or majority part to itself versus external shareholders, you can see how the natural investment thesis assumptions of a company could get distorted.
Yeah, but if it was in debt to itself, or if it was owned by itself is ultimately just represented by the board anyway, no?
What do you mean?
Like companies don't make the board is like the brain, the thing that's deciding what the company should do, right? The company doesn't make decisions independent of the board. That's what the board is for. So even if the company owns a ton of its own stock and doesn't retire them, the board is still ultimately choosing how the company would represent itself on the board. No.
But the board is elected by the shareholders. That's what I'm sort of saying could be a problem, is that if the board has, and to be fair, neither of us seem to know the answer, is that
Gotcha.
If the board is able to be influenced directly by corporate management, that would reverse, again, generally the accountability and sort of valuation structures that we assume.
Yeah, it would fuck everything up for sure.
Yeah, because you don't want a company voting even in minority part to a certain extent on the management of a board.
Yeah, the only thing I'm saying is that wouldn't the board decide how the company votes? Here, let's externalize this a little. Let's say that a company owns 50% of the stock of another company, right? Your company, as its own autonomous thing, isn't deciding what to do with that 50% ownership in another company. The board of that company is deciding what that 50% stock is doing, right? They're the ones exercising the voting rights?
No, no, not really. I mean, so it depends on the issue. So sometimes, I mean, you own stock. You've probably gotten notifications
Emails
of like,
like,
hey, yeah, time to vote for this or that. Like typically, I think what shareholders directly vote on is oftentimes mostly just the board of directors. Like at least in my experience owning stock, that tends to be what you get the notifications for is, hey, it's time to elect the board of directors.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else, because everything else like dividend policy, bonuses, compensation, from bond packages. I mean, that's all pretty much always the board that takes care of that stuff. So it's kind of a representative system, but the board doesn't. It's a representative democracy in a certain extent, right? So the board is acting on behalf of the shareholders. They don't tell the shareholders
allocate voting rights to
vote.
them basically when they send out the emails and shit. I think you have the right to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somebody,
exactly.
I've got a guy spamming in chat a lot, or I shouldn't say spamming, I'm sorry, but I think I've had two people say this. So when you buy stock as a company, when you do a stock buyback, it stays in treasury. So it's retired from the amount of float that's in the market, but it also means they can easily use those shares to raise money in the market again without a very restrictive process like an IPO. But that the treasury stock doesn't necessarily allocate like voting rights or control of the company to the company, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're commenting on that directly, but it seems like what they're saying is just which is that a company can hold their own stock and sell it later. So if a company, and they're right, it's less expensive because when you issue equity, you have to hire an investment banker. They're going to take 3%, and then you raise $100 million. You have to give 3 million of them to those guys. So if you buy your stock at $10, you buy 100 shares of your stock at $10. Go.
Oh, hello.
$10 capital gain on the shares that you're buying. So, I think, that sounds right.
Okay. All right. I need to do sponsor stuff. So, hey, I love you. It's fun. Be careful. Okay.
All right. Have fun. I love you, Destiny. Everyone, if you want to hear more about economics, subscribe to Econoboy. It was good talking to you.
Yep. Peace out. Stay safe. For the 3 people that care about this conversation. Somebody in chat brings up an interesting point. You're completely leaving out discussions of options traders. Call holders gain from share repurchases and lose from dividends. That is true. Whether or not you do a stock buyback or whether or not you pay a variable dividend would have a significant impact on derivatives markets. Because derivative markets aren't based on the total capitalization of a company or whatever. It actually goes just by the share price. That's interesting. I've never thought of the implication of how are derivative markets affected by your choice to do a buyback versus a dividend or whatever. But
Bravo! Ugh.
Is there a difference to you between
poorly or do not talk enough, you'll be eliminated. If you do good enough, you'll stay in. I want no complaints. The odds of you winning the championship, considering the amount of people here, is 6.25%. So please enter this knowing that most likely you're a humegalol who is going to lose. If you do that, then you can't get your feelings hurt.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Look at you, Xander.
Humaleg?
Yeah, I'm like WHO Megaloi now.
Now,
oh, is that the Xander? Do I hate him?
No slurs,
no, that's Xavier.
And no attacks based on immutable characteristics. That means no going after anybody because of their race, gender, sexual orientation, identity, or anything of that sort.
What if they're immutably stupid?
That's fine.
Is religion fine?
Religion? Oh God. Let's just pretend the question wasn't asked.
Anyway. What about if they're Jewish? Is that like religious or ethnic? Is that okay?
Okay,
or?
we're not. Okay, you know what? We're not going after religion. We're taking that off the table. Thank you very much. So, welcome to the championship. We're going to start the first round, which will be about 25 minutes before the first person is voted off and replaced. The first topic is how is Biden doing as president? How is he doing as president? Is he doing a decent job? Is he doing a bad job? I will introduce you all because we don't have time for intros. The people on your screen right now is American Nacho on the top left. Next to him is Counterpoints. Next to them is Demon Mama. Next to them is Destiny. I, of course, am Dylan Burns TV, your luxurious host. Next to me is Sprouticus. Then it is Trihex, then Xander Hall, then Lonerbox. You can find all the information in the description of the YouTube video that will be produced afterwards. You may begin. Please remember to follow the rules, and remember, you know, always be nice. Make sugar your favorite spice. You may begin.
Yeah. All right, guys, what do you want to start with? Do you want to start with his response to COVID, his infrastructure plan, immigration? Where do we want to start?
Are you saying that it's positive or negative?
I want to start with the fact that the first problem Biden encountered, he directly handed it off to his vice president. Like, the first actual problem he went into office and encountered, it was, okay, this is Kamala Harris's problem.
What problem was that? What problem was that?
Immigration and the border wall.
Yeah, she went over to, what was it? I think it was Guatemala, I think it was, where she did like a statement about it, where she talked about how they're going to be giving, I think it was $2 or $3 trillion in aid. I forget what country it is. It's in South America, and it's got, like, we have a lot of immigrants that come to there due to the crime and the corruption of the government. She said she's going to, the Biden administration's going to be funneling a ton of money over there to help root out the corruption and stem the crime.
It didn't even want her there, though. First off, that country didn't even want her there. Second off, she still hasn't been to the border. The closest she got was 30 miles away in San Antonio. That is the closest.
I don't know why. Who cares?
What does water there mean?
Wait. One at a time. One at a time. The first person I heard was Destiny, so I'm gonna give it to him.
Yeah. So number one, delegating things to your VP is not a bad thing. I don't know why we make that sound like a bad thing. And number two, who the fuck cares if you actually go to the border wall or not? I mean, I guess we could talk about like the optics of how that looks, but I think it's probably more relevant to talk about border wall policy, whether or not you have a photo op of the border wall.
It's not just a photo op, though, is it? It's more than a photo op. You're going down the border to see what's on the ground with your own eyes, because that's really how you get a perspective of what's going on, is when you look at it through your own eyes. You can say no, Destiny, all you want, but this is how presidents have done it for decades. Okay, when something goes down, they go there. And Biden decided that it was Kamala Harris's problem, and Kamala Harris didn't even go there. The entire Biden presidency has since been a joke. Biden did about COVID was he adopted Trump's plan with a few minor changes.
We gotta come in here.
I'm just saying that it's a bit of a joke.
Like, okay, hold on. This is really silly. It is absolutely normal for presidents to delegate tasks to their vice president. This is a like completely invented grievance. If we're gonna talk about things that like Biden has and hasn't done, I have a couple things I could bring up. One of the things, a bit of a topic that's in my wheelhouse that Biden has done really well, which is a civil and social victory, is that he has now instated a federal policy by which trans people can have without needing a complex and incredibly lengthy process, actually change their gender marker and name on their passport, again, without a whole pile of paperwork that's necessary. That's really, really awesome. In fact, they're also going to be adding in an option for a non-binary gender selection on passports, which is huge and not something that's likely to be undone. One of the things that I most praised about Obama was the fact that Obama actually put into place a policy by which you could get your passport changed just with a note from your doctor. You no longer need that now, which is fantastic. I support that very much. The only problem with Obama's version was that it was immediately undone by Trump. This is not one that can do that. By adding a non-binary option, it becomes very difficult to undo. That is a civil rights victory. With regard to COVID, I mean, look, anything is better than what Trump did. Trump literally went around saying that COVID wasn't a problem. Right now, I'm just checking, just out of curiosity on Bing here, fatal cases of COVID in America is a 612,000. So, you know, I'm just going to say, damn, Biden's done a pretty good job getting the vaccination out to people. We've had a significant drop in deaths from COVID.
Nearly half of all adult Americans are fully vaccinated. It's been pretty significant. On his first day in office, in his first 100 days in office, Biden enacted, I believe it was executive order to mandate mask wearing on federal property and mandatory quarantines for international travel. $2 trillion in spending on COVID relief. Pretty damn significant, way better than Trump. Trump's administration didn't have any plans whatsoever for vaccine rollout. They found that during the transition. Biden's plan, far more constructive, an actual plan for starters that exists, and has had a much larger effect. We're actually starting to see things go back to normal,
I thought I was on a panel.
Wait. Counterpoints. Hasn't said anything yet. He was the first to grab it. Counter.
Sure.
I thought I was on a panel with a bunch of leftists. Why are we blowing a neoliberal fascist? What are we doing here? Like, is this just gonna be a circle jerk about how fucking?
I'm sorry. Have you ever seen me call Biden a neoliberal fascist? Because I don't know if you're aware of my content, but I spent basically the last 2 years, almost 3 years that I've been doing this, shilling for Biden over Trump. Okay, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever at any point that I've been doing this that Biden was a better pick than Trump.
I thought this was all tactical. I thought it was all tactical because Trump was like the actual fascist, and the Biden and the Democrats are just this like ineffectual fucking stopgap for fucking like. No,
if you want me to complain about Democrats, we can talk about the infrastructure bill and those that won't vote on it or that won't support it. But I'm not going to take away achievements that Biden has made because I have criticisms of him. That's not how you honestly critique someone.
You're taking them away from Trump. You're taking them away from Trump because the large majority of what Biden has done so far for COVID. The large majority of what Biden has done so far for COVID was following Trump's guidelines and how he was going to act in the future. He made very little to no changes. He made very little to no changes to the actual plan, and Biden just carried out what Trump was going to do. That's all Biden did.
There was no plan.
Biden's rollout wasn't
Pause.
Oh God, this is like a nightmare.
D-Mama was
I
the
don't know
first
if
to
I
grab
can.
it. D-Mama's the one.
Jumping into this conversation is like.
I've had Loaderbox say anything yet.
Appreciate that. So there's a couple of things I could say here. First of all, if we want to go into critiques of Biden, I do have a very solid critique that I would like to make of Biden, but I think that it's fair to give credit where credit is due. Even me, a extreme lefty, I think it's very good. We are in a time of extreme crisis, and that the good things that are done should be praised. I think that the goal that he has of pushing through the human infrastructure plan is absolutely necessary for our economy. Keep in mind, a pandemic is a disaster that affects individual people. It affects individual people. They get sick, and that damages the economy. We need stuff like that. But if you want to know what my critique of Biden is, well, my critique is that he doesn't have an answer that's good enough for climate change. Climate change is a global threat. I mean, I've been doing so much research on climate change recently, and it is horrifying. If you even go look at the flooding in Germany, literally unprecedented flooding in Germany, if we have something like that happen here, I have no doubt, given our preparedness for something like the pandemic, that we're not ready. And I think that Biden needs to be willing to do aggressive action. And I just don't think he is. I think he's too committed to trying to play bipartisanship with people who are straight up obstructing him every step of the way, sometimes to the degree of just straight up inhumanity. The unwillingness to even engage with the idea that we might need to provide some relief during a global pandemic, and we're supposed to be ready for climate change, a climate change that is surpassing every single prediction that we've had so far, which were already dangerous. Yeah, I'm sorry, but Biden needs to really spine up on that. If you want my criticism of it, that's the biggest one. Climate change is terrorizing our entire country already. We have a drought currently declared in where I live. We have droughts all over California. We have fires. We've begun to have smoke seasons. We're going to be having flooding if we get heavy rains. This is a super, super serious issue that Biden, I mean, for all of his talking about wanting to do an infrastructure plan, simply hasn't pushed hard enough. They need to play dirty. This is a matter of being willing to play hardball with the
So I have a quick question.
Demon Mama, wait, can I
Yeah,
go first?
sorry, Alexander, can I go there? Because I was
Yeah, it was
jumping before.
Loner was next,
Yeah.
and then we'll throw it to counter. Just want to be clear.
Cool.
Just
So,
to put the
wait,
just
I
to
thought
put the
next
COVID.
after me. Wait, is Lonerbox after me, or is it Lonerbox lead, then Lonerbox, then counterpoints?
I
I
think
don't
you said
know.
that was first.
You know, act like a man and get
Okay.
it yourself.
Okay, really quickly. So, Demon Mama, I understand that. However, it
Wait,
seems
did you
like
not hear me? Xander, I said it would be Loner.
Okay, let Loner do it. Okay.
Thank you. Just to put the COVID relief bill into context, that was, with accounting for time, that was the biggest fiscal stimulus in American peacetime. So I think I heard someone in the background saying that it was more private companies that, no. As for Connor, yeah, leftists having a favorable view of Biden. Okay, I'm a leftist. I hate Biden. I wouldn't trust him to sit the right way on a toilet seat. But looking at what he's done so far, politicians are not leaders. A politician's job is to read the room, power relations, public opinion, etc., and make a decision. As far as that goes, Biden has so far broken with a very long-lasting economic orthodoxy in America that was the legacy of Obama, of Clinton, Bush, Trump, the idea that by basically introducing the idea that state intervention in the economy in a time of pretty desperate social need actually works. I'm from Europe. We do it all the time. You should try it. When it comes to, but of course, there's plenty of room for criticism, not just from a leftist perspective. We'll complain about everything. The climate plan and the jobs bill do have plenty of flaws. They don't really live up, even in some ways, to the standards of the people who promoted it. It's not very cohesive. The infrastructure plan doesn't really melt that well with the climate plan. The way that their high-speed rail project is very limited compared to how many roads they want to build. Well, building roads means you get more cars, and that doesn't really gel very well with the climate plan. But so we can talk about that. But yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes liberals do things right. It's okay.
Okay, so I have a quick question for the leftists or whatever that I think would be helpful to ask. Is basically like oftentimes we bitch about how the right wing is like fiscally conservative when it's inconvenient to do so. And as far as I understand, inflation is basically like the printing of money in relation to economic activity. And as much as we want to pretend that we can just do what we've done with the stimulus, which I think was good, by the way, and necessary, we have seen some logistical shortages. Right now, when it comes to housing, I think housing is up 30%. I think the value of vehicles is up 30%. I think construction materials, some construction materials are up 200, 300%. And as far as I understand, I literally just talked to an MMT guy a few weeks ago, is that basically it's not necessarily the printing of money that's the problem. It's the printing of money in relation to like no economic activity. So are we willing to concede as a panel that basically you can't endlessly print money to solve problems, or that these things need to be balanced, or you know, like is the right wing completely useless and we should just print whatever the fuck we want, whatever we want?
I don't think it's a question of like. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think it's an MMTer's like job. It's going to be to look at everything through the lens of like printing money. But I mean, when you look at coming out of like a historic downturn in like the global supply chain, if you're going to see prices that are inflated, it's probably not inflation caused to monetary policy. It's probably inflation caused to like a failure in the supply chain. So like there have been factories all over the world that have had workers laid off that have like been closed for long periods of time, or that have had other problems or other shortages. And when that happens, it's going to drive up the cost of goods, especially coming out of a pandemic now when people are starting to buy things more than they were before. When these factories are trying to get the production back online, you're going to start to see prices be inflated. But economists are going to be worried to call that inflation until we've gotten like a few quarters through it to see where the prices ultimately end up at.
Okay, at the risk of being productive on a Rumble panel, basically what that conversation boiled down to was the fact that that's been the case all of the time. Whether you're talking about the Weimar Republic, Venezuela, or any of these prior examples, it basically is a relation of like logistical breakdown in relation to printing of money supply. So I know that you're saying like it's the logistical issues, not the inflation, but that's basically was like the historical analysis that was presented to me, was that was always the case. And COVID, one second, almost done. And then COVID very specifically is basically like one of the most drastic downturns in economic activity. You're talking about like, I don't know, 30% of like the workforce basically going to a work from home or partial work model. We're talking about retail and restaurant kind of revolutionizing over the past 2 years. So I would say that we don't know what the fuck is going on, and we don't know what's going to happen. So all I'm looking for is a little bit of concession and nuance, and I'll leave it there.
I guess you can think about comparisons because you can think about.
Demon Mama was trying to go in after. I'm gonna give it to Demon Mama.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah,
Start the
look,
timer.
it's not just a matter of concessions or anything. Like printing money isn't the only way to reallocate funds. We have funds that go all over the place. We have a ton of money that goes into the U.S. military. We have a ton of money that is lost in tax cuts that have been made to the highest of the highest income earners in the country. We have taxes that have been cut based on the size of enormous companies like Amazon. These are ways that we can get the money that we need. But what we do know is that there's been that COVID has killed tons and tons of small businesses. COVID has killed employment. Like there's a retail worker shortage in America right now because it is so difficult to get everybody back in for things that are opening up. And of course, that's not even getting into talking about what happens if there's like a second wing of this pandemic with Delta variant, Lambda variant, whatever. The problem is that it's not just about printing money. Sure, that's one possible solution. There are many possible solutions. And I think the Dems need to be pushing very hard on that. Because here's the thing, if what you're saying is true, that there's logistical issues, well, the logistics has been knocked out. It seems to me that it would be essential this is the perfect time for the government to say, we need to jumpstart this logistics. We need to get things up and running again. We need to fund small businesses so that people can start making things again, so that people can start working again. We need to make sure that people have buffer so that they don't become homeless and lose their homes. That worsens the economy. Just so you know, like people who don't have a home, it's really hard for them to get a job or work. That's going to seriously impact people's abilities to get their businesses up running, especially if we're talking about corporations, like massive corporations who were able to weather the pandemic, and then they're going to have outdated hiring practices where they're not going to hire people because, maybe you don't have the right level of experience or whatever. They're going to have shortages. So we seriously need the government to step in and go, we've experienced a global pandemic that has killed a shocking number of people. We need to jumpstart the economy. I don't care if it's done through printing money or if it's done through reallocating taxes or if it's done through moving funds from somewhere else. But the reality is that America is a country that's supposed to serve the people.
This timer is 6 seconds short
We're supposed to be.
I started late.
I'm gonna call a time on that because that went on for a while. I do want to throw it to
perfectly.
It's like 2 minutes and 12 seconds almost.
Loner, because Loner didn't want to talk.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so I agree mostly with Demon Mama on that, but I think one of the things that people are missing out on is that a huge part of the pandemic was also a realization that certain industries are kind of outdated. I think the biggest example of this is movie theaters. You're seeing some movies being pushed into theaters and some people returning, especially as vaccines get rolled out more. But you're also seeing some areas where movies are not being put in theaters, and instead they're being viewed even more so on streaming services. I didn't go to a movie theater to watch the new Black Widow movie. I watched it on Disney Plus. So you're going to see a lot of movie theaters shutting down, people losing jobs from that. Not to mention a huge way the economy is fueled is by people spending. You got to spend, and that typically results in the economy growing. Unfortunately, right now, due to the pandemic, a lot of people are short on money, or they're hoarding it because they don't know what's coming. They want to make sure they can pay bills. If people have the money to be able to buy things, not just their basic, groceries that they need and whatnot, you're going to see the economy grow. A lot of people have been staying inside, saving their money. If they even have money, they might have lost their jobs. Stimulus bills are a good way of dealing with this, and I've not looked much into printing more money, but. Yeah.
I don't want to go.
Not when I'm gonna block that cut and throw it to Loner.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just maybe. Yeah, because every time when I hear people talking about this, I feel like it's always worth reminding people just how not very overwhelming a lot of this is. Like it's overwhelming in the sense that America hasn't really done anything like this since, I don't know, maybe the 60s. But like if you look at the comparison to other countries, like one of the things in this infrastructure plan is like that they said was groundbreaking is like 500,000 electric vehicle charging points. Well, compare that to Germany, much smaller country, they're going for 1 million. So as far as comparing to other countries, like this isn't as dramatic as it might seem. And then I don't know, with inflation, then yeah, if there are inflationary pressures, then you have to maybe raise interest rates or, God forbid, raise taxes. And maybe that's why this kind of plan is starting with Biden kind of testing the waters, because there's going to be a big political risk there involved down the line. But yeah, it's not that. So far, it's pretty underwhelming.
Moving back a little bit.
I'm giving it to Sprouticus, and then I'm gonna give it to Trihex, who hasn't talked in a while.
Moving it back a little bit, there's a reason. Dima Mama brings up all the people who aren't working, right? There's a reason people aren't working. It's because Biden has failed to do his job. Biden has failed to end the federal unemployment bonuses that people are getting. People are getting paid way too much to sit at home and to not be going to look for a job, and that is what is hurting the job market. What Biden needed to do was needed to end those benefits and start pushing people to go out and get a job. But the reason they're not is because they're comfortable getting money. They're comfortable not working a job, and they're just going to continue to get this extra money and not work a job until Biden ended it. Now that Biden did end it way later than he should have, states are still continuing to keep this going. States even like Indiana with the Rhino, who is the governor of Indiana, it's still going in Indiana. But this is the reason you see the shortage in job market. It's not because people don't need money. It's because there's too much money being sent by the government to these people to where they don't feel that they need to work.
Do you mind if I
Spartacus, I don't think that there's any people getting unemployment that are not getting a job because they think unemployment is enough. I don't think there's a lot of people.
I mean, that's just empirically false. Like the most.
I mean, it's not empirically false. It's actually.
If you look at
there's 4 people talking at the same time. Okay, Trihex.
Well, actually, before I even clap on that, Sculpt, way your earlier point here about like the crisis at the border wall and all that, bro. I think you're consuming way too much Fox News propaganda because what you're really rooting here is the idea that if like ex-politicians not visit the border to see the crisis going on right there, that obviously they don't care. Subordinates can't go, traverse there, visit there, and then relay information to the appropriate people so they can carry out the agenda required necessary to what they were told in the first place. But I even go back earlier because whenever because what the framing you gave there was one that's reminiscent to me of like whenever someone like AOC visited the border detention centers and cried and was like really distraught from what she was witnessing. That got played up in ex-partisan mainstream media outlets as like look at them doing their thing now. So honestly, I feel like what you're doing there is the same shit that you see elsewhere. Whenever it's the side you want to hate on, doing it as well. So I think that point was completely garbage. And then going into the whole thing
I do want to say, you're getting a lot of points deducted right now for terrible fucking mic quality.
I am.
You're the wrong mic is selected. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm sorry. Fuck, no one told me.
I'll bring it back to you after somebody else grabs.
Yeah, my bad.
So Trihex, you're gonna try. I mean, he kind of came after me, but go ahead. He kind of came after me, but go ahead.
Yeah, but you addressed me directly. I just want to address that. So first of all, like this stuff about like, oh yeah, people who are already struggling and unemployed, they'll go get a job if you force them to go out. That is just ridiculous. First of all, that doesn't happen in any other country. Like Canada was giving a universal basic income, and their economy had people were still spending, people were still buying food. It's very stabilizing. The idea that like you make more money on unemployment than you do with a job it's just ridiculous. People aren't going out because of a couple reasons. One, they can't find the work. Two, they can't actually get the job because of whatever reason. Or three, they're still scared of the pandemic, or their workplace no longer exists anymore. Like this is just like literally like stock, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like I don't feel like this is a serious argument. The idea like, oh yeah, if you give them unemployment during a global pandemic where over 600,000 Americans have died, that it's just like it should reflect on them. This idea of like secret welfare queens sucking up everything, that's so ridiculous. This is fear mongering. It doesn't have any basis in reality. And
never was. That's a real quick thing.
And hold off of that. No, because I have a point. Another point that I want to say. Something that I wanted to respond to.
I gotta give you 15 seconds, and then we gotta move it on because we only have 3 minutes left in the round.
I wanted to address something specific that Zan brought up, which is, it'd be amazing to see something that we had in America for a very long time: public arts projects. You want to get people spending, you want to get people out doing things in the economy again. Have the government fund and put some stuff out there. Movie theaters are gone under. Let's get that stuff.
Never once did I suggest.
Sounds cool.
After this route, we're going to Destiny, then Trihex, and we're ending the round.
Never once did I suggest that the extra unemployment benefits wasn't needed during the coronavirus. We are in the recovery stage. It needed to be ended far before Biden actually ended it. And actually, where you see a lot of people not going to jobs, a lot of people that are seeking for jobs, it's low-skilled jobs. And these low-skilled jobs, in some states, in most states, they're making more money off of the federal unemployment benefits than they would be if they actually went to work. So the idea that you're saying that people aren't doing this, it's fear mongering. It's not. It's not fear mongering at all. And going back to Trihex, talking about the border wall, or the border. So Kamala Harris was in charge of the border. It's been precedent for decades that presidents and whoever's in charge of whatever goes down and checks it out with their own eyes, not send someone else down to come back and report to them. That's just been precedent, especially when you're going through a crisis like we were going through the border crisis. But not only that, but Biden actually reversed a lot of what was going on, right? So Biden actually made the border a lot worse than it was during Trump.
Sprout, we gotta cut you off. We're running out of time. I have to throw the Trihex Destiny. You both got like 30 seconds max.
Okay, whatever you were talking about earlier is a bunch of nonsense here. Ultimately, it's inadequate wages going on in the first place right there. They've always been trash. They've been stagnant for a very, very long time now, since, what, 2009. Increasing the minimum wages is an overwhelmingly popular thing. It's even been popular in Republican Utopia, Florida. And that has failed to be done because too many moderate Democrat senators are pieces of shit, obviously, and I can shit on both ends on that spectrum completely here. And obviously, you should be pro some kind of injection of wealth into like this declining, shrinking middle class, because the poverty floor is really, really bad. And long story short, it's really, really bad for the economy overall when you have a declining, shrinking middle class altogether. Just kind of keeping some bullet points there, as I'm sure on time.
Okay, gotta throw it over to Destiny.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors about secondly, there's a lot of points being brought up about how unemployment insurance might be causing an increase in unemployment in states. A ton of economists have dug into that data. They've looked at like different industries of unemployment rates, different states that have ended early. Most economists believe that there's like a marginal impact, like a very small impact on unemployment insurance on the current unemployment rate. So the idea that UI is preventing people working is probably not true. To bring it back to like, has Biden done a good job or not a good job? The amount of stimulus that the United States has poured into its citizens over the like entire coronavirus pandemic period has been higher than I think any other countries in the world except for like Japan. We spent a ton of stimulus in this country. A lot of that came from the Biden coronavirus relief bill, which I think is awesome. That is a form of UBI to people that have children that file for their child tax credit early. I think it's one of the coolest things that Biden's done, and I think that's why he's been a base president over the coronavirus period.
Round's over. I have already been told by the judges who's getting kicked out for this round. So, 3 votes. Oh, 2 of them actually. Wait, let me wait for Vadim.
Wait, I missed the rules. Who votes? Does chat vote or just
No.
like?
Fuck chat.
Okay, fuck chat.
Fuck chat, yeah. I don't trust chat. Well, with 2 votes in, I don't really need to wait for the 3rd vote. We already have 2 votes in for the same person. I'm sorry to say, and Vadim, please send it through Twitter DMs in the future. American Nacho, sorry to say, you are out of here. I gotta say, you have gone the furthest in hippy dippy history with saying absolutely nothing in a contestant's history. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. I think it was a huge statement on centrism, and I love it.
Yeah, true.
Okay. You really are like doing nothing. I'm sorry. See you later.
Hog.
Okay.
Cool. Like that.
Wonderful. Okay, next person. Aircraft Sparky has entered the arena. A conservative commentator on Twitch and YouTube. Okay, you guys can go to the next topic. It is the death penalty. Should it be abolished? Should it be kept? You may begin.
Should be abolished. It is on the onus is on those that support the death penalty to prove that it provides any useful function to society. I've looked into it. It does not. It seems it has no effect in deterring crime. It doesn't seem to make people feel as though justice has been served. I think the utility caused by the likelihood of innocent people being falsely found guilty and given the death penalty is bad. I think that the cost of it is far more than housing a prisoner for the rest of their lives. There is no reason whatsoever to have the death penalty. It is stupid.
Agreed and agreed.
I couldn't agree more with.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I think that.
So everybody that disagrees?
Yes.
No, wait. Do we have people who are on with the death penalty? Yeah. Look, I don't think the state should have the ability to declare the future life or death of somebody who's already been apprehended and has been imprisoned or whatever. I have problems with we could go further into the prison system, but we don't even need to talk about that. The death penalty doesn't do anything for us. It's barbaric. It makes us look terrible. And in addition, it leads to a lot of very questionable situations. I mean, we've had, I think many people on this panel are probably aware of the extended torment that certain death row inmates have had when their execution goes incorrectly. As it turns out, there's no real humane way to kill somebody, and there's a lot of room for that to go wrong, and that is sickening and disgusting. And I don't.
The big thing to point out there, I don't mean to interrupt, but I feel like it's worth bringing up, is that a lot of the time there can be lack of access to the proper chemicals used for lethal injection, which is mostly what you use now, and so they revert back to older or not as useful chemicals, which can result in a prolonged and much more painful death. Not to mention, and I guess we can get to this in a moment, but I mean, there's tons of cases of people who were apprehended by the police, who were falsely identified by witnesses, because sometimes when a witness sees something traumatic happening, like a murder, they may misidentify. The police can bully and coerce false confessions out of suspects. There's a lot of cases that can occur and have occurred of the wrong person getting the death penalty. I believe 165 or more people since 1976 have been exonerated after being on death row. Those are just the people who were found to be innocent.
Isn't that a good thing, though? Isn't that a good thing that 165 people who are on death row were found to be exonerated because the courts actually did their jobs with the appeals process and found out that these people actually weren't guilty and they weren't deserving.
Better if they weren't on death row.
Okay, so
wait, let him finish. I'm interested. Wait, stop. I want to hear him.
So you started this off saying I'm making that people who are pro the death penalty have the onus to do this because they have to prove it. You would then therefore, following your own logic, have to prove that there was a large amount of people that died from the death penalty that were innocent. So I'm going to look forward to you coming through with that thought process.
Can you finish my point? It's cool.
If you have
awesome. I'm sorry. Hold on. I have to say this.
It was directed towards Xander Hall. Xander Hall should respond. Yeah. Okay. We got to make it quick because a lot of people.
It's very quick. Spartacus, if you had a bowl full of jelly beans and you pulled a bunch of them out and you found that 152 of those jelly beans were poison, would you feel very confident in continuing to eat that bowl of jelly beans? Because that's basically what you're advocating for here in a more simplified way. If there was 156 people that were found to be innocent, that were taken off of death row, do you think there's a lot of people that haven't been found? Not to mention, that's not even getting into the fact that once you kill a suspect, you now have gotten completely rid of the ability for that suspect to contribute more to the case, to find out if there were accomplices, someone who made him do it. I think there was a case that Sean talked about in his video on the death penalty from the UK in Wales, where a guy took the fall for his neighbor who murdered his wife and child because he was trying to protect that neighbor and didn't know that it wasn't an accident. There's so many cases where executing the person who's the suspect gets rid of any ability to continue an investigation into the case.
So
I think there's like
I want to build off that, please.
What? Okay, but you got 20 seconds.
That's fine. I only need 20 seconds. Listen, so this is, again, you misunderstood what Zan's argument was in the beginning. You have to prove why we should kill people and what benefit that provides to society. Because as it is right now, it doesn't seem to be providing any benefit, and it's incredibly expensive. The appeals process, holding somebody on death row, is ridiculously expensive to our entire country, in addition to the moral issues that are brought up with the death penalty.
Okay, I feel like most of the arguments...
Okay.
So I feel like most of the arguments that are brought up against the death penalty don't really work. The jelly bean analogy doesn't work. Would you eat one jelly bean or would you eat a jelly bean at 150 if one was poisoned? I mean, like, we essentially make this deal every single time we get into a car and drives, every single time we get into an airplane and go somewhere. Like, we make this deal all the time. In terms of whether or not it's barbaric, I mean, like, it's the death penalty, of course. But if you've decided as a society that you want to punish somebody that's committed certain capital offenses with death, barbarism probably isn't that far away from what you're trying to do. In terms of, like, could it go wrong? Yeah, a lot of things could go wrong. That's not an argument not to do something. And in terms of being expensive, I mean, again, that's a societal decision to make. I'm opposed to the death penalty because I think that it fundamentally betrays what the justice system should be about, which is rehabilitation. When you have an idea that you can commit an offense that's so heinous that, like, you ought to be killed or removed from society, I think that that type of mentality guides, like, the entire way that we view the criminal justice system, and I think that we should change, like, the idea of, like, punishment or retribution into something different, like rehabilitation. But I find that most of the arguments that people use that are opposed to the death penalty end up just, like, not really working because they don't really make much sense. We've gone through the jelly bean one, we've gone through the, like, is it barbaric? Like, something else people will say is that, like, oh, well, life in prison is actually more cruel than the death penalty, so that's why we shouldn't have the death penalty. It's better punishment. Okay, well, what about the people now that have to suffer for life in prison who were innocent instead of those that could have been executed, which would be better? Like, I find that most of these arguments just don't make any sense.
So
Can I give some
I mean, that's
Bailey?
Okay, when am I?
I would like to give some
Destiny's point? Can I respond to Destiny's point?
I mean, Xander Hall, you've interrupted me twice trying to respond.
Well, okay.
Sorry, Spadix, I love you, buddy.
Okay, so there's a lot of people talk to. Everybody who just tried to talk, raise your hand quick, okay? I haven't heard Counterpoints talk, and I haven't heard Aircare Sparky talk, so I think we're gonna have to throw it to them.
Okay, so I'm going to give you some Bailey instead of some Mott. So there are certain crimes that I think should be punishable by death. Those include infanticide, terrorism, and torture murder. If you were to look at these as anecdotal cases, basically as individualistic cases, I almost guarantee you I could convince some of y'all that these motherfuckers deserve to die, basically. I also think that you can raise the evidentiary standard to beyond a shadow of a doubt. Doshkar Sarnaev is an example of that. Anders Breivik is another example of that. People who we know beyond a shadow of a doubt committed the crimes that they committed. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Doshkar Sarnaev is the Boston bomber. He killed, I believe, an 8-year-old amongst his victims and maimed dozens of other people. I believe Anders Breivik killed around it was between 100 and 200 people with bombings and executions. Some of those people he literally executed right in front of each other, simultaneously moving on and on. Last time I got into this debate, I was told that I was not allowed to describe the crimes that people committed, which I think is I get it's Twitch TOS or whatever, but that's insane to me that we can have a conversation about whether or not death is a valid punishment for a certain crime, but we can't talk about the kinds of crimes that we're talking about where death should be administered. So basically I said that we don't have to go with the current standard with which, innocence is basically, up to doubt. We can go with beyond a shadow of a doubt thing. So then to overcome some of your objections, you said no humane way to kill somebody. I refuse to believe that. There's probably pounds and pounds and tons of heroin on the fucking street. Let's go get a fucking purity test and send them out on a fucking OD. That's an easy fucking solution. Administrative cost. Again, if we move to the beyond the shadow of a doubt statute, then we basically don't have to have as sincere of administrative costs to retry the case dozens and dozens and dozens of times. We can literally say, did this motherfucker do it? Yes, he did. There's the 99.9999999% evidence that they did do it, including their own admissions and digital forensics and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, buddy, you fucking killed a 8-year-old. Blap. Here's some heroin. And then as fine as. Okay. Final point. Social utility. Okay. Final point, social utility. Anders Breivik bitched about having a fucking PS2 after murdering 200 people and said that was cruel and inhumane. Fuck that motherfucker. He deserves to be in the ground.
D-Mama.
Okay. Yeah, so you still haven't provided an argument for why we should do it. I do also agree with Destiny, though I think that the argument that the death penalty sets the standard for the rest of our prison system and our justice system, I think that's a valid argument, but I will note that does basically boil down to a barbarity argument. Our prison system is ultimately barbaric. It doesn't work towards justice. It works or rehabilitation. It works instead towards punitive solutions that often don't even work. And this is the thing. People say, oh, well, it's more torturous for people who have to live in life. Well, maybe we shouldn't be torturing them. They've been apprehended. Maybe we should try to make a genuine effort to understand what led to people to be in these places, keep them away from where they can't hurt anybody. But why? What benefit? Nobody has actually been able to put out what benefit is there from killing these people, from having the state have the ability to summarily execute somebody. This is basic. You have to answer that question, and it hasn't been answered. It simply hasn't.
All right,
First of all, there are just some crimes that are just so heinous. The only way, there is no reform for it. It is nothing but retribution that needs to be had. I'm looking at child murderers. I'm looking at people who do adult things with children. Yes, I believe that they should get the axe, and no, it should not have to be something clean and so humane. I am all for get the guillotine, let it drop. Gravity does its work and is cheap, recyclable. Man, just think of all the great things that can happen. When you look at it, there are just some crimes that are just so heinous that there is no chance for reform. We're not going to let them back out to the public. Why should people even bother with feeding them anymore? Look, if you're a mass murderer, if you kill 30 people, chances are you're not going to be reformed, nor are you going to get out of prison. That is heinous. Now, there are states that do not allow the death penalty, and that's all well and good. Look, the people have made their decision there. But in the states where it does exist, allow it to exist. It is a state-by-state deal. States' rights is a real thing, and the people have decided that it is perfectly fine. I'm all for bringing back the electric chair. I don't care if they suffer.